Hello, everyone. This is Venus Brown, bringing you content on media from the distant and not so distant past. If you're up for it, then join us for our Blast from the Past segment. And hey, if you like this content, hit the thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and if you'd like regular updates, ring the little bell accordingly. All right, everybody. Today, for our Blast from the Past segment, we are approaching Handmaid's Tale Season 1. I'm using an intro on YouTube on the Alice channel, the song called Pure as Snow, a Mike Rasnick remix. I like this intro because it really pulls in a lot of the imagery from the season and it keeps the feel and the design of the show together. Handmaid's Tale is something that I was actually introduced to by my husband. If I had just looked at the title or heard the title of the show, I would have had no clue what it was about because handmaids to me sounds like a handmaid. It doesn't sound like what it is. The show is a dystopian show pulled from the book by Margaret Atwood called The Handmaid's Tale. It's based on these religious ideas that because humanity has gone so awry and because birth rates are down so low, we're going to take this Christian sect, which basically takes mistranslations of the Bible, utilizes those to make excuses for all the horrible things that they do in this dystopian nightmare. The thing that I kind of like about this is that it approaches so many topics that actually have happened in real life in our world. This isn't something altogether that has happened in our world all at the same time in the way that it does on the show, but it pulls from things that have occurred in the world in real life in order to make this fictional dystopian story. And there are so many things that have happened, even in our country in America, that I think can make you feel like, even though we would always think that this would never happen here, it's starting to feel like it really could.
This is Venus Brown. Today I'm going to be starting my first ever Blast from the Past episode. I am starting with Handmaid's Tale because I just have a lot of past vestment in Handmaid's Tale. I've read the books, I've watched the shows multiple times. I've at least done reactions to the last season. I wanted to start out in June's escape outfit, but I honestly don't have any jeans. I do have a jacket that's similar, but that's about it. Instead, I'm doing kind of an adaptation, it's not a very good one of her outfits she is wearing when she's shown in a flashback with her mom. She's wearing a white blouse. She's wearing a tan jacket that fits much better on her than this one does on me. I actually got this to wear in a Castiel costume a while back from Supernatural. It is quite big. I will be taking it off because it's heavy and warm and I live in Florida. I'm wearing this blouse and this cute little teal skirt. I do not have a lot of suit sets. There's a brown one, and the brown one I may wear later for another season. I do not do high heels, so I'm not going to be doing that. Just to let everyone know, this is kind of going to be my setup, at least for this initial season. Go a little bit in order of episode, but I will also be putting in more thorough discussions of certain topics and certain people. And I've tried to match up those topics with an episode that I think has a decent amount of focus on that. I will be showing images while I'm talking. There will be some episodes that have a considerably longer amount of discussion and talking than others. The series actually goes through a considerable amount of setup during the first episode and throughout the rest of the season to try to gradually fill you in on what's going on, what life was like before Gilead, and how life has dramatically changed after Gilead. In fact, when we see those first images of Gilead, it looks like it's from some other era in the past that we haven't seen in a long, long time. But in reality, it's actually supposed to represent a future image after Gilead has taken over. When the first episode opens, we are introduced with a flashback of June, her husband Luke, and her daughter Hannah trying to escape from what was early Gilead before things got worse than they already were. They are shown in a car driving fast. They're trying to escape from somebody chasing them. He ends up skidding, losing control of the vehicle. The vehicle ends up crashing near a wood line. He gets them out, checks to make sure they're okay, and he asks June to please take Hannah across the road, go north, and keep going for a couple miles where somebody's supposed to meet them. And as we know, that does not end up happening. And of course, we're shown this image of June in this room in a very different environment with a very different attitude to cope with the situation, handle being there, try to stay alive in order to survive for her daughter, Hannah, who she hopes to get out. And that's kind of the overriding theme throughout the entire series, is this urge to get her daughter out. Almost everything that June does in pursuit of bettering things for the handmaids, for the children, and for anybody else is inevitably an attempt to eventually try to get Hannah out. Another thing is all the stuff that they were doing to find out and keep tabs on all these women that had had babies. And they used so many excuses to claim that they had broken Gilead law in order to take them hostage, traffic them into being a handmaid, give them the choice: you either go to the colonies, work your ass off until you're dead, or you go be a handmaid and have children for these commanders. We'll see flashbacks throughout the episodes sometimes that I think June uses for coping. She says a lot of times when she's in the bath that she has these flashbacks of Hannah when she's at an aquarium, which is one of their happy memories. Occasionally she has flashbacks of their escape and trying to get out of there, and Hannah being ripped from her hands and her being knocked out. That, at least in the book, she says is like one of her hardest flashbacks that she has to deal with. June has this walking partner called Of Glen. Her real name is Emily, but she does not actually find that out until later. And the walking partners, they say, are supposed to be there to provide safety so that the handmaids have safety with each other. But that is also kind of nonsense, because there are guards all over the place that will shoot a person in a second for stepping out of line. So it's not really about safety. Walking partners are their mirrors. They are there to keep tabs on them, to make sure that they are doing the right thing, that they're not stepping out of line. And both of them have been brainwashed and bred so much to believe that the other one might cause them trouble that they're just a lot less likely to step out of line in front of the other partner. It makes it more likely that they will not trust the other partner. And you see that a lot in the early part of the episode, that June doesn't really trust Of Glen. June sees Of Glen as this very pious person, possibly a true believer. This is the same with how she feels about her in the book. As the show goes on, things do start to happen and develop to where Of Glen and of Fred start to develop more comfort and understanding with each other. Those names of Glenn and of Fred, those are taken from the commanders that they are stationed with. So of Glenn, so Glenn would be the first name of Emily's commander. Of Fred, Fred would be the first name of June's commander. We see in other flashbacks that there are also some differences and some similarities between what happens in the show and what happens in the book. I think what happens a lot of times is they just take certain pieces of events and they switch them out with other events. Some of it they keep almost exactly the same. And in this particular scene, we have an image of Moira talking to June in their cots, and they are talking about how eventually this has to end. Everything has to go back to normal. And when that happens, they're going to get out of there. They're going to escape. They're going to go back and they're going to get Hannah out of there. And this is something that's going to come up later on in the show and later on in the series. This promise that Moira has made that we will get out of here, that we will go back and we will get Hannah out of here. One of the most disturbing things I think we see in this episode is the monthly forced rape ceremonies every month when they're ovulating. In the book, June has this discussion about how she faces this ceremony, how she deals and copes with it. And what she says is that she steels herself. She says that this is a word that she got from her mother, where women try to make themselves like steel, focus on something else, and try to completely detach themselves from the situation. And this is a tactic that June uses throughout the show when she's dealing with these ceremonies that she's forced into, that she doesn't have any choice in the matter. Even though they say that she was given a choice, the choice wasn't a real choice. And these monthly ceremonies are just one of the many, many steps that Gilead has taken in this authoritarian dystopian regime. Use false scriptures in a way that are completely twisted from what their original intent meant, to keep everybody in line, everybody doing what they want. The severe surveillance state where you can't trust anybody and you could be turned in for almost anything at any time. They have these things called salvages, and in some of those salvages they actually have something they call persecutions. And the persecutions are called that because the handmaids are actually called to participate in the killing of people that they have put on trial and deemed to need to be terminated. In this situation, we have Aunt Lydia telling this story about how this man had raped these handmaids and one of them was pregnant and she lost the baby. And this brings this fervor to the handmaids, this anger to the handmaids, because as June says in the book, this is too much. Although I think a lot of us who were watching expected that this probably is a bullshit story, that you don't really know. It is during the preparation of this persecution that June hears Janine say that Moira is dead. And then Janine, with her attention-seeking self, says that, oh, well, she was sent to the colonies, so she's dead by now. She must be. And that, of course, has June noticeably shaken up. And if Glenn takes notice of this, and I think this is what starts this kind of shift in their relationship, where they do start to slowly become more comfortable with each other. It's this acknowledgement that they're both human beings and that they're both having these raw emotions from all the awful crap that's going on with them. And when Glenn sees that June is noticeably shaken up, she checks up on her. Are you okay? And then she slowly starts to tell June of some of the stuff that's going on. But before that, she also tells June a little bit about herself, about who she was in the past. And June also tells her a little bit about her past. Does warn June that there is an eye in her house, and this puts June on guard. She's looking at all the people in her house, wondering who's the eye. Could it be the Martha? Could it be the driver? Could it be somebody else? Close out the episode. We get these images of the Marthas trying to prepare for a big dinner, and we see the wives and the husbands. The husbands are all meeting for this secretive meeting, which is a buildup for something that happens later when they have a delegate come to visit. They also have another business trip that will occur in DC to put together this delegate trip that we're going to see happen later on. A couple things that I noticed early in this episode brought up this focus on who might be the eye, and that Nick might be dangerous, that Glenn might be dangerous. And there is something that's brought up by one of the girls when they are at the store. Fred is very high up on the chain, and this is the second time we hear about an eye possibly being in their household, and the second time we hear that a Fred is actually fairly high up on the food chain. Now, sometimes I wonder in this series just how high up is he, because there seem to be several people that are far higher up than he is. But it is specified in the first episode and the second episode that Fred is a very high up commander. And it is also specified in both the first episode and the second episode that there is an eye. And one of the places that they go to on some of their walks is this wall. And on the wall, they have people hanging from them. I believe on this one, it's a priest, a doctor, and what they call a gender traitor, which is somebody from the LGBT community. June specifically talks about every time she checks the wall to see if it's Luke that's up there. Because when she left, when she was taken, she heard shots fired. And she's pretty sure that Luke probably died, but she doesn't know that 100%. So she has these ideas about what may have happened to Luke. He might be dead. He might be alive. He might have gotten out, but he might be prisoner. And so every time she goes to those walls, she looks to see, is Luke hanging up there? And of course, every time Luke is not hanging up there. She also talks sometimes later on when she starts to develop this relationship that we see later on with Nick. She starts talking about, is she going to see Nick hanging up there? When June gets back, she's kind of in a daze. She has been caught out in the rain. There have been a lot of fucked up things that happened to them on their walk home. Nick asks about her being out late. Was she caught in the rain? And that she was out for quite a long time. And she explains that, yes, she was out a long time. And then Nick asks about Glenn. And she's like, well, Glenn is my walking partner. So yeah, we go and walk down by the river and the storefront. And he's like, well, you need to be careful of her. And she's like, she's my walking partner. Of course I'm going to do this. But that apparently isn't what he was actually in there for. Apparently Fred had actually told him to go tell June that he wanted to see her later. And he slowly says, yeah, he wants to see you. And she's like, the commander? Like, why? Because this is not something that is supposed to happen. And they talk about this in the book and in the show. The handmaids and the commanders are not supposed to be left in the same rooms together by themselves. This is not supposed to be a thing that happens. This is supposed to be a part of Gilead's security from the commanders overstepping their bounds. But Fred does a lot throughout this show to bypass some of those rules, to push against the rules and kind of do the things that he wants. And he does this for a lot of reasons, but we'll talk about that a little later. And one of the main things that we get to see in this second episode is this completely off the wall ceremony that is ridiculous on so many levels, where the wife, Naomi, is actually acting like she's the one delivering and giving birth when she's not. We see flashbacks in this episode of when June had Hannah when she was in labor and then after giving birth. And we see her where she is in front of the nursery and talking to one of the nurses about the babies that were not there. It's morning, her baby has been born, she's going back with the nurse, there are no other babies in the nursery, and she asks about the other babies, and the nurse tells her that some of them had died, that some of them were stillborn, and that the rest went to God before the night was over. So this gives us a little bit of an image of what is going on with some of this issue of low birth rates and low infant mortality during this, but we'll see other stuff also. Later, we see this image of June waking up. Nobody's in the room with her. Luke has gone to get snacks and the baby is not there, and she's freaking out a little bit because she doesn't know what's going on. And then an alarm is sounded in the hospital, which we don't usually as civilians really know what some of those alarms are, but all the alarms are ringing, the lights are flashing. It looks like it's serious. And then she sees Luke. He tells her that he went for snacks, and she explains that the baby is missing. And he tells her to stay there. And you know, June, even before this, she's not going to just stand in place. He goes to try to figure out what's going on. And she moves forward. She sees that same nurse, at least I think it was the same nurse that she was talking to earlier, bludgeoned down the hall, blood pouring out of her head. She's probably dead. And then she continues moving and sees this young girl holding a baby. And come to find out, this is actually June's baby. She has taken June's baby. Luke sees her and grabs her, tells the cops that are right there because of the situation that this is his baby, and they manage to separate the two, get the baby away safely. But you come to find out that this young woman is probably one of the girls that actually had a baby the night before that did not make it through the night. Another thing that we get in this episode is images from early Gilead when they first started to take over America, and June had first been captured and taken to the Red Center. She's showing this image on a slide projector of a graph with little teeny pictures of infants. Charts are supposed to represent the amount of live births that were being experienced around that time in America, and it was showing how over the years those amounts have gone down and down and down. And there were several reasons for that. And less women deciding to have children. And it was contributing to people deciding to have children later in life, which can increase the chance of disabilities. Top that off, there were these nuclear disasters that were contributing to poisoning the air. You have the global warming greenhouse gases problem. You have the nuclear proliferation of the planet, you have other toxins like hairspray, like insecticides, and things like that. There's another thing that was discussed in the book. I don't know if it was discussed in the show, that there was actually this strain of syphilis. So that was one of the things that they said also contributed to some of the sterility in men, even though Gilead won't acknowledge that men are sterile. From what I could tell on the images that I saw online, is supposed to be from around 2015. But there is another episode in the show where June is in a flashback talking about when she got pregnant and was worried because there was already a significant problem with not many women having live births, and with a lot of the live births with unhealthy, ill, deformed babies. In one situation, Serena comes, asks her what she's doing, and tells her that she needs to come with her. And they ask her how things are going up there. And like, the women are so condescending. They're treating her like she is a dog, literally asking her, "Is it breech? Have you heard that word, dear?" Then asking her if she wanted a cookie, saying that she's such a good girl and she deserves a cookie and you should give her a cookie. And so Serena offers her like the driest, most bland cookie that I know of. I have heard from my oldest child that macarons, if they are made correctly, actually taste decent. But all of the macarons I have had have been dry and bland, and I do not like them. Unlike macaroons I love. They are delicious. The ones with chocolate and coconut, so yummy. She takes the offer for the cookie, but the whole time they're treating her like a dog. And she shows her disgust later on when she walks to the bathroom and she spits it out. I think it was that whole situation so turned her stomach. You see this scene where these wives are together and they're talking about how awful the handmaids are. And Naomi says that Janine has bit her. And she's like, "Janine, did you bite her?" And she's like, "Yeah, because she's a freaking cunt. Like, this bitch was going to take my baby away, and I told her she was hungry and she was still eating, and she just took her away anyway." And in my mind, yeah, biting the woman was way out of line, and it could have definitely gotten Janine in a huge amount of trouble. It could have gotten her dead. That takes some freaking guts. While June is down there listening to this conversation with these wives, like, they are talking to her like they know more about the development of children than she does, which is completely ridiculous. And they sound like complete ignorant morons. I think this was also one of those situations where they were telling Serena, "Oh, but your handmaid is so well behaved." Like, yeah, you haven't seen her yet. She hasn't gone that way yet. One of the images when June is not upstairs yet, she talks of Glenn, because she had found out in the previous episode from Nick that Fred wanted to meet with her alone, which is a very scary prospect. But she doesn't know exactly what's happening, and Glenn is also a little shaken because this could be bad. She says that maybe he has a past with this, and she's going to ask around, and June says it's too dangerous, but she's like, "Oh, I'm sneaky, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll see if I can find anything out." But she doesn't find anything out, and by the end of the episode, we do find out that this secret rendezvous is to play Scrabble, which on its surface might seem okay, but I think we know in the long run, these Scrabble sessions are really to promote some grooming in June, so she will be more used to much worse things to come. And then she goes and makes her descent downstairs, and she talks about how it reminds her of these creepy horror movies where the young teenage girl is going down to the basement intending to meet with her boyfriend, hot whoever it is, and they're going to have fun, and she ends up descending into the basement to her bloody demise. And that she says that the girl is a moron. And she says before she knocks on the door, please, God, don't let me be that moron. I feel like the Scrabble sessions are a way that Fred has used both on his end. He's trying to get a little more intimacy with the handmaid so he feels more comfortable during ceremonies and stuff, but also so they both feel more comfortable in other situations that they will experience later on. And a lot of what goes on in these ceremonies, whether it looks innocent or not, involves him letting her break rules, him pushing against a lot of the rules that exist in Gilead. Rules that if they find out she broke them, she could easily be put on the wall. She could easily be killed for. And I do believe that he is doing this intentionally to get her used to breaking some of these rules because he feels like the rules don't apply to him. Him as a high-up commander, he can get away with a lot of things that others in Gilead cannot. And so he is also trying to get his handmaid to be more comfortable with breaking some of these rules so that she won't freak out when she is in public situations with him. He lets her look through magazines, then he starts playing Scrabble with her, which is a game of words, starts offering her gifts. And another thing with the Scrabble ceremonies, I am assuming that he did the same shit with the previous handmaid, the one that died, that hung herself. And I wouldn't be surprised that some of the stuff that he's doing now with the Scrabble and then later on with Jezebel's is probably part of why she committed suicide. June comes out to try to tell of Glenn what had happened with the Scrabble ceremony, and it's somebody else. And in the book, she describes how there's just something that looks not quite right. She doesn't look ill or injured or anything, but she's not quite the same stature and she looks a little shorter, like there's something different about her. And then she turns around and finds out it's this completely different girl. And she's like, oh, fuck. And this girl is like all about following all the rules and like staying in line and keeping her partner in line because she doesn't want any trouble. So that becomes a little challenging because this is just at a point where June is starting to get comfortable with the idea that maybe she might want to be involved with some of this network. And now it's like, nope, this is a new girl. I don't know her from hole in the wall, and it looks like I can't trust her. This knew of Glenn's reasoning for wanting everybody to be in line is because she used to be an addict and now she's clean and she feels like she's actually in a household where the people treat her well and she has this sense of belonging. And she does not want to get in trouble because she does not want to get removed from her household. She's actually happy with her current situation. And it's interesting because later on, she ends up in trouble because she's one of the first people that actually pushes back and speaks out when they try to punish Janine. Get an image towards the end of the episode with Janine being woken to feed the baby, and Martha asks if she needs any assistance or anything, and she's like, look, I did this with my son Caleb. I know how to breastfeed. It shouldn't be a problem. And she does without any problem. And she notices that the baby like grabs onto her hair like Caleb used to when he was an infant. And then she starts singing. And Janine actually has this beautiful singing voice. So it was just a really, really awesome scene. I want to talk a little bit about Janine because Janine, I think, is very important to the series. We're getting ready to see some stuff later on with Janine showing that her mental health is not good, that she's lost touch. But Aunt Lydia will make this remark when it is pointed out to her by June that Janine is much stronger than you realize. And I think that is very true. The problem is at that time, that was the wrong time for Aunt Lydia to depend on Janine's strength. Because at that time, she was really in a broken down position and they really should have been paying more attention. Janine starts out, when you first meet her in these flashbacks from the Red Center, she is spunky, she's got character, she is like not liking this stuff going on in the Red Center and thinks it's a ridiculous bunch of crap. And when Aunt Lydia starts spewing about how great everything is, Janine makes remarks, get Aunt Lydia's attention, and tells her to get up because of what Janine had just blurted out in front of the entire class. And Janine says, fuck you. And because of Janine saying, fuck you, she basically has the aunts go pull her out of there and she is taken away. We don't see her until later on when she has had her eye gouged out for saying fuck you to Aunt Lydia. She had her freaking eye completely gouged out because you don't need an eye in order to procreate. And I think that's like the first point where Janine really starts to crack, like losing an eye for something like that. That gives you this reality of just how dire the situation is. And I think that really made her crack, at least at the time. But I think there are other points in the show where we think Janine's really just lost it and there's no point in listening to her. I think she gets away with stuff because of her mental health. But we find out later on that Janine is actually got a lot more going on than we think she does. I think part of this appearance of being, mentally unwell and always being chipper and looking at the positive side of it, everything, I think is a natural coping mechanism that she uses in order to survive this very devastating situation. Because girls in this kind of situation are going to react in any number of ways in order to feel like they can survive. And Janine looks at the bright side of things. She also does a lot of butt kissing. She tries to be a good girl, which Aunt Lydia likes. And that way it will be much easier for her. She'll get along better. So episode 3 starts with June suddenly being treated really well by Rita and Serena. They are decking her out with tons of good food and being really pleasant. And Rita's a decent person, but Rita is not usually pleasant to June. Especially early on, Rita does not get along very well with June. She doesn't talk highly to June. And June definitely picks up on that. But in this episode, Rita is treating her so nice. She's being sweet to her. And for Rita, it's like genuine sweetness. But even Serena is treating her nice. If Serena's being nice to you, it's not a matter of her genuine good heart. It is more that you are doing or have done something that makes Serena feel she's getting something she wants. So what is it? They both think that she might be pregnant. Rita at least has the understanding to know that it's because you're late, and even though lateness doesn't necessarily mean pregnancy, it means it could be pregnancy. So Rita's being genuinely good to her with this idea that you might actually be pregnant and we might be bringing this sweet innocent baby into the picture. And the Marthas actually have a big part in taking care of those babies. And the idea of in a world where there's very, very rarely any healthy babies born, and women don't even get pregnant that often, this is a hopeful thing. Serena's basically convinced herself that you're probably pregnant, and this means that I'm getting a baby, which is what Serena's always wanted, is this baby, and she's finally going to get a baby. And so Serena's treating her really good because of that. But we do find out later that June is actually not pregnant. And so she will unfortunately reap the whirlwind later on when she tells Serena, and Serena does what Serena does. As soon as things are not going in Serena's favor, she is this complete demonic possession of a person who is horrific. This is the episode also where we get to see some of the background of what actually happened early on that caused America to start to get taken over by Gilead, where they dismantle the entire Congress, the Senate, the White House, take over law enforcement, take over the justice system, and they blame it all on Islamic terrorists, when really it's Christian extremists. They suspend the Constitution, which they claim is going to be temporary, and then they're going to bring it back, but that doesn't happen because it's Gilead taking over. They have no intention on using the Constitution because the Constitution wouldn't work for what they want to do. And then you see the images where women are losing their rights. First, June has this situation. She tries to get a coffee, and her credit card is turned down. And this same thing happens in the book. Her credit card is turned down. She has this discussion with the waiter who is completely rude when her card is declined, and she asks him to rerun it again. And then Moira comes in and hears him saying this stuff to her, and he's just being just freaking disgusting. They go home, and June's been trying to figure out like why she can't get into her account. Nobody's able to get through to the banks. She ends up talking to Moira later and finds out, oh, well, they have passed this new law where women aren't allowed to own anything. Women can't own money anymore. June goes into work, and her boss comes in and says that he has terrible news, but he couldn't do anything about it, that they're all being let go. And this is also the same in the book. So all these girls are like, what the hell is going on? Like, you're freaking insane. Like, why are you firing all of us? And he's like, you're not being fired. You're being let go. I couldn't do anything about it. And then you see as they're walking out, like just how desperate the situation is and why this man is acting what seems very crazy. These men are standing outside with M16s, machine guns, and shit like that. The women are not allowed to have jobs anymore at all. They are not allowed to own any property anymore at all. They basically have no rights. They have become objects of ownership of their husbands, like used to occur hundreds of years ago. And we also see some images where they're trying to protest this whole situation because it's fucked up. I guarantee that there would be lots of protests, at least initially. But like they said in the book, that stuff is very, very quickly squelched, because what happens when they go on these protests? The Gilead people start opening fire on the protesters. And not just opening fire on the protesters, these people are literally setting off explosions in the area. In a later episode, we're going to see more of this Gilead buildup with flashbacks from Fred and Serena. Fred is complaining about the inaction coming from, these people are called the Sons of Jacob, by the way. Gilead is the name they call the country after they take over. the sons of Jacob, he says, are kind of dragging their feet and don't want to take action. And he's expressing frustration to Serena about it. After Fred is complaining about their lack of action, he gets a call and he says that he's getting the go ahead on a plan to attack the White House. That's like the real beginning. In 3 weeks from the time he gets that call, they have these explosions. They take over the White House and start removing everybody's rights. And I do wonder, because I read both The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments, if the court takedown that Aunt Lydia describes in the Testament is actually very similar to what they're claiming occurred with this whole congressional and legal takedown of the White House and everything in this episode. I wonder. I mean, it's based on the same story, but the Testaments was written a long, long time after Handmaid's Tale. All this stuff to implement all of these very narrow, tight regulations that Gilead uses in order to keep this surveillance state going. Because you have to have this surveillance state in order to keep everybody in line. Nick is already a driver early on, and they are talking about how they're going to get the buy-in from the wives, and they come up with this crazy-ass idea for the ceremony in order for the guys to be able to screw these other women to get them pregnant. And how they're going to get the women to go along with it is by making it a religious ceremony, because, they'll eat that up. So freaking disturbing. And they ask for Nick's advice on something, and he's like, you need to keep everybody involved disconnected. Handmaids are captured, and they show this with June. When she first gets in, while she's still in civilian clothes, they have her sit down in this empty room, and they bring out a machine that clamps on this cattle tag on her ear, which we're going to see that all the rest of the series, that red cattle tag. Even after she removes it in one of her escapes, she ends up getting tagged again. And one of the things that she says in the book about getting this cattle tag put into her ear is she talks about the smell of gunmetal, that it's like a nail gun, and they show it, and it has this loud banging noise when it clips it onto her ears. It's really painful. And I imagine that pain that she experiences the 2 times that she has to get that freaking cattle tag put on her may be part of the reason that she keeps the tag in after she's escaped. Just in processing into this place is so freaking horrible and traumatic. And then the rest of the stuff as they're going through training and the stuff later on after they get through training, it's all so freaking traumatic. So Serena takes June to see Janine. She just kind of assumes that because they're both handmaids, they're great friends. And June isn't necessarily friends with Janine at the time, but I think they're starting to form this very odd sort of friendship. Even though June used to actually look down on Janine, now she's starting to form this friendship a lot because I think she feels bad for Janine. This is one of the things that I was talking about on the last episode. And visits Janine, finds out what's going on, where Janine is like, I get treated like a princess because I had a good baby, a whole healthy baby. And by the way, in the book, Janine's baby doesn't actually end up living. Labor and delivery and the birth, and the baby looks all right, but then later on the baby dies. But in the show, the baby lives. The baby does go through a period, though, where it is unwell. After June is done visiting Janine, and after she had also pointed out to Serena, Janine is not doing well, and Serena actually acknowledges that what they do is a very horrible thing. What they ask those girls to do is terrible, and that some of them lose touch. And she associates it with the ones that aren't strong enough. What she doesn't realize is that even the strong ones, in some cases, end up breaking. Driving June back to the Waterford household, and he stops her and starts telling her, don't be brave. Do what they say. He says that everybody breaks. He tells her that he couldn't stop them, that he tried, but he couldn't stop them. June's interrogated about the walks that she has with of Glenn. Not about of Glenn's activities with these networks, with Mayday. No. About the fact that she's a gender traitor. And it's interesting because she specifically said that even though she is a lesbian, and that usually would like be a no-no, like they would consider that a criminal offense that they would send you to the colonies for, because they knew that she had a viable set of ovaries, they made an exception. But it seems like they must have this situation where only certain people know about that exception. Even though they made an exclusion for her to be a handmaid, even though they knew she was a lesbian, now in this situation, they're saying that this relationship that you had is gender treachery, and Gilead does not care if your crimes were in the past before their laws were in place. They consider those laws to be ongoing from before and after, instead of being about what you would think Gilead should be most concerned about, her activity with Mayday and with these underground networks. Their concern was her gender treachery. Lydia, she goes freaking crazy on her. She attacks her with a cattle prod. This is still the episode where Rita and Serena think she might be pregnant, and Serena comes in there and she stops the whole thing, and she's like, you need to get the hell out of my house. She's pregnant. And then Aunt Lydia all of a sudden feels so terrible, and that it's such a great thing that she's pregnant. And stupid ass I says, oh, congratulations on your miracle. And I'm like, are you fucking out of your mind? Like, you let this shit go on. You were part of it. And now you're like, oh, what a great miracle. Give me a fucking break. Then you get this scene in this. Emily is waking up from this hospital situation, and there's small beds with white blankets on them. The walls are white. Everything's white. And she's dressed in white. And she stands up. She is freaking aching. And she looks down to find out, like, what's going on down there, because I don't think she quite realizes what it was at first. And then Aunt Lydia makes some freaking disgusting comment like, oh, now you will not want what you cannot have. It's very significantly traumatizing. And you go and freaking try to do a surgery to take away more of our physical sensitivity. And it does not completely take it away. It doesn't take away that need for intimacy either. But I think after Aunt Lydia says that, that's when it really, really becomes clear what happened. And then you see, like, the actress does such a good job at portraying this revelation in her face, whole freaking conglomeration of all these horrible emotions. And then they end that scene with her screaming. And I think she does such a good job at portraying how awful that is. I learned a little bit more about her being a professor in college. We also find out that she was married to another lady. They had a son together. When they were trying to escape, they both had passports. The child had a passport, but Gilead refused to count her marriage as a legal marriage. They said that because her marriage was not valid, her passport is not valid, so she was not allowed to leave. Her wife and her child were allowed to leave because they had Canadian passports. Found out she was from Missoula, Montana. she was in college teaching. There was this situation in the class where she ends up showing this girl a photo from her phone of her wife and child. She gets called out for that later and told that she should really hide this. And I don't think the guy was trying to be homophobic in this situation. I think he was starting to get wind of the awful shit that was going on and was warning her that it would be better off if she tried to hide it. And God, when he first started saying that, I was like, what a fucking asshole. But then later on, when you see what happens to it, and you're like, oh crap, he was gay too. He got freaking hung. And another thing that we learned about Glenn early on, Glenn has been actively involved in these networks, in Mayday, and I think maybe some other networks, in trying to push against Gilead. And she's going to be placed with Commander Stevens, so she becomes of Steven. The wife at the time, she makes this excuse that she doesn't feel well, that she's not feeling well, and they're going to skip ceremony. And Emily says something to her to the effect of, you're not going to be able to say that you're sick for every ceremony. Like, we can't avoid this forever. But you can see that Emily is like really in a bad place at that point. We have these images of Serena where she's being all nice to June and telling her, all this great, wonderful stuff. June is her freaking miracle because she's going to get her the baby that she's always wanted. And then June breaks the news that she's not pregnant. Serena does that thing, completely turns her face around and becomes the demonic spawn that she is, and starts yelling at June as if what June did was intentional, like as if June not being pregnant is her fault and that she's this horrible person. And then she fucking yells at her, hits her, throws her to the ground, and tells her that she's going to stay in this room, and screams that she could make things so much worse for her. Do you understand me? Do you understand me? All right, everybody, I'm in my Handmaid's Tale costume. I actually have a red shirt and a very long, high-waisted red skirt underneath, which would almost work with Handmaid's outfits, except my shirt is short-sleeved, and my skirt has a huge bow in the back, so that would probably not fall in line. And this is not exactly what I dreamed of when I started making it, but it's close enough. In order to make the back, I didn't want to do the same thing that they did. I didn't feel like putting in that kind of effort, so I just took a handkerchief that I had. It has flowers on it, which I think are pretty, which I know would not fly in Gilead. But I thought if you were somewhere in the country or whatever where you don't have people spying on you all the time, this could be like one small way you could like push against some of the ridiculous rules of Gilead. I like to, show my style, so I could imagine doing something like that if I thought I could get away with it without being hung up on the wall or without being treated like... When episode 4 begins, June has been in that room for 13 days. Her knuckles are raw and bleeding, which I think is one of the signs that she really is not mentally well at that point. You can see in her face and the way she's acting that she's really kind of losing it a bit. Isolation like that for long periods of time without really being around anybody, it can really take its toll on people. And when Rita comes up to give her some food, she sees that June has passed out on the floor, which makes her completely flip out. June plays it off like, oh, I must have just passed out, like maybe I'm not doing that well. And honestly, she's not doing well. Rita goes and tells Serena that she's really not looking well. She really needs to be seen. Serena's like blowing it off. There's nothing wrong with that girl. I'm going to talk about mental wellness generally. There's like a lot of things that occur in this dystopian reality that make it so that people are generally mentally unwell. There's a lot of stuff going on so that they do not get the kind of help that they need when they're mentally unwell, and also so that they use that mental unwellness sometimes to just deal. And sometimes they use their mental sanity to deal. All of it, to me, is a little bit of a way of coping, but all of it is a little bit a way that your body and brain just can't help but breaking down like this in a situation like this, because it's just too much. It is way too much trauma on almost everybody involved. It can make even the strongest person break. Unwellness can also be somewhat of a coping mechanism. We see both of these traits within Janine and June in this season and in other seasons. Situation after having her eye gouged out, the treatment that they receive in the Red Center, and then later on in Naomi and Warren Putnam's house, being told that in exchange for these sexual favors that she's providing Warren, that he'll run away with her and start a family, when that's something that's very important to her. And her not picking up on the reality that this is just bullshit, that he is just feeding her a line to get her to do what he wants. Later, her flipping out when she has been taken from her previous situation and put into another forced raping ceremony way too soon, that sends her to a total attack. She freaking kicks the guy, she screams, she backs off into the corner, curling up into a ball. She's really not well, because Gilead don't do mentally unwell. Rita also says, well, it's also supposed to be the day of the ceremony. And on every period near the ceremony, these girls are supposed to be checked. Now, they specifically talk about this in the book. I don't know if they do on the show, but there's supposed to be this required doctor's appointment. They go to have their blood work taken, make sure that everything's looking okay, check down there and make sure that they're ovulating and that everything's going on all right and that they're ready to go. That at least gives Serena the like, okay, have her seen for an appointment. Weeks out after being propositioned by that creepy doctor who wanted to get her pregnant, who was likely doing the same thing with other girls. Nick tells her that he wishes that she wasn't going through all this. But June rightly asks, wish what? Like, what are you really going to be able to do about it? June's going through another one of these Scrabble sessions, and then she has a ceremony. And I think because of the Scrabble sessions, it's causing this conflict where June used to be able to just steel herself, focus on something else, and kind of disconnect and isolate herself from what was going on enough to be able to deal with it. And now it's causing this uncomfortable situation where the relationship is different. It's changed a little bit, and it makes the whole thing feel much more awkward. Fred also has this situation where he ends up, not being able to get anywhere. And Serena has the decency to offer to try to help him out with it. And it doesn't get anywhere. It doesn't get anywhere because he fucking makes her stop. In this episode, we do get to see Moira's escape from the Red Center. In flashbacks, we see Moira and June attempt to escape from the Red Center. In the book, June was not in this escape, but in the show, she was. But June does talk in the book about Moira's mechanical knowledge and how she could do certain things, kind of like she did with the toilet. She goes and takes the toilet apart. She gets that metal piece that attaches to the plunger that allows the toilet to flush. She uses that, puts it up against the ant's throat in order to threaten to kill her. But she doesn't kill her. She ties her up. She does the same thing in the book. She dresses up in the ant's clothes and she marches right out of there. In the show, she marches out of there with June. She ends up in this subway station. The words have all been removed, which makes it a little bit more challenging for them to figure out where they're supposed to be going, because there's no longer signs to tell them where they are and where they're going. June starts getting questioned by guards, like, why are you here by yourself? Because these girls are all supposed to be walking in pairs. June is getting questioned. The train comes. Moira sees the train. Moira's looking to June, and June gives her this kind of nod and this approving look to please just go on so that she can at least escape. And she does. Or in the show, June ends up, after she is inevitably caught because she doesn't get on the train, she gets her feet whipped. It causes them to be very swollen and bloody and sore. And they show her back in the little cots, and because she can't walk, and it shows the girls, the handmaids, coming in and giving her pieces of food from their meal as a sign of camaraderie. And that is one of the good things, is that this does bring this kind of sisterly community among these girls. Look, there is a period before Moira escapes where she tries to just get out of some of the stuff that they were doing in the Red Center by playing sick. And they take her away, and then she comes back later on the next day, and they have done the same thing with Moira's feet that they did to June's in the show. Just shredded them with an open cable. The girls would bring packets of sugar. And we see some of that sisterliness also in the deliveries where these handmaids are delivering babies. When some of the handmaids get in trouble later on, when Janine gets punished. So you do see that camaraderie throughout several episodes in every season that comes from the handmaids, and we'll see it in other seasons too. In episode 5, Serena warns June that she is running out of time. This is her third posting, and another failure can result in her being sent to the colonies. And she suggests that maybe Fred isn't able. Like, she's been here this long. This is the second handmaid, I believe, that's in their household. And June, actually, as it turns out, had 2 other postings before this. I believe the postings are supposed to be a year long, and then you get transferred to somebody else if you don't get pregnant. If you do get pregnant, you stay there, go throughout the pregnancy, you nurse them for a few months, and then you would leave. And I think they said it ends up being around a 2-year period in total. She's only allowed 3 postings. If she fails after 3 times to get pregnant, they will send her to the colonies. That maybe Fred is part of the problem. And in Gilead, this is not supposed to be a thing. Like, they have brainwashed these people into all just saying that it's all the woman's problem and that it's not the men, even though I think a lot of people know that some of it is the men. And so Serena suggests that there might be another way. Serena requesting that Nick and June do this, and she makes it like it's a favor to June, and in a way it is, because it is going to keep her from getting sent to the colonies. But it's not really a choice. If Nick says no, Serena's going to make him pay in some way, shape, or form. And if June says no, she will definitely make June pay. I think it is a benefit, at least, that June and Nick seem to have this connection. In this episode, we also get some signs of the resistance networks like Mayday. Not only does Fred bring up of Glenn, but June sees her on her shopping trip. She's now called of Stephen because she's been assigned to Stephen. She is still very traumatized from that situation. First, when June kind of indicates to her that she would like more information about Mayday, of Glenn is like too afraid. And she doesn't want to say any, she doesn't want to help at all. And that stuff is not going right now. After telling June about Mayday, she like hijacks this car and she goes joyriding around the plaza. It's her one little bit of feeling of having some freaking power. and having some freedom. She hits one of the guardians, goes and backs over another one, completely obliterates his leg. And of course, that is when she ends up being sent to the colonies. What a way to go out. It was definitely a beautiful bit of resistance. And all the other handmaids, they got to witness this. And I think it really made them feel a little bit of power in the process. And these signs of Mayday and bits of resistance were dispersed throughout the show in different episodes and seasons. He also talks in the show and in the book about how the Marthas have their own little network. And when if Glenn was taken away the first time, she commented how she didn't even know her name, which will come into play later, I think in season 2. There was one comment that Fred made about an aunt that he said was interviewed after she escaped over the border. And at first I wondered if the aunt that he was talking about might actually be Moira, but I don't think it could be because Moira never quite made it over the border. June ends up getting these letters. They're all from these handmaids, all kind of telling their story of what happened to them, of how they were captured, of how their children were taken, about their loved ones that they were searching for and longing for, and all of this. So that was really cool. Saving Janine from being stoned, that was one of their bits of resistance. No one could go along with it or abide by such a terrible thing, because you're talking about killing a person for breaking in a system that was made to break these girls. There's this one episode where June says this line: they shouldn't have given us uniforms if they didn't want us to become an army. So priceless. Episode 5 is probably a good idea to talk a little bit about June before Gilead and Fred now. We do find out early in the season June's from Brooklyn. She had gone to college when Moira did. They were actually kind of rooming together, and Moira is her best friend. June was in the book editing business. The book, it says that she had been in that job for a couple years, and in that job, what they were doing was formatting library books into disc form, and they called themselves discers. As in the book that they saw each other in hotels, and that they did this actually for a fairly small amount of times, but she said that it seemed like it was an era because it was such a major part of their life. But she does specify in the book that this job makes her enough money that she is able to move out from this place that she was with Moira in, move in with Luke, so that they had their own place that was a little bit better. She said also around that time that Luke was working to separate and divorce his wife, Annie. The book doesn't really go into detail about their marital problems that existed before, but we do get these little hints in the show about Annie not being able to have kids, which comes up in later seasons. We see in this episode that June tells him that he needs to divorce her, which he agrees with, and she seems surprised. And he responds to her, "I'm in love with you. What else am I going to do?" June is also not this role model or some Saint Mary or something like that. June is actually this flawed person. You're kind of normal person, has some positive characteristics and some negative characteristics. And one of the major negatives is that she started her relationship with Luke while he was still married to her. But this flawed human person also ends up eventually doing a lot of things that turn out to be somewhat heroic and helpful. So you have this contrast of this person that might be set up on a pedestal that sounds like a hero because of some of the stuff that she does later on in the series, alongside this person who can also be very self-centered, who puts herself ahead of other people, who gets other people killed, frankly. People, after a while, started to really think negatively about June. I just like to think that there would probably be a lot of really horrible, awful things that we would do, both directly and indirectly, in a situation like that, to try to keep ourselves alive, to try to escape, to try to do the things that we think are right to do. I don't think any of us are above that, trying to accomplish whatever she is accomplishing. Like, very forward thinking, we've got to accomplish this, we're going to focus on this, and in whatever way we can get this accomplished, that's how we're going to do it. And doesn't do a lot of pre-planning, at least it seems that way, which does end up rubbing people the wrong way. It gets people hurt. It sometimes ends up with stuff not happening like it should. But then again, it also sometimes results in major things happening that never would have been accomplished if she did not have that kind of push and drive to make those things happen. Early on in the show, at least at this point, June hasn't really gotten to that point where she's super self-centered and risking people's lives. She hasn't got to that point also, though, because I think Serena and Aunt Lydia and Fred have not really sunk their hooks into her enough to set her off on that bad of a path yet, or on that heroic of a path. She's not the person yet that is going to be involved with Mayday in a major way. She is not the person yet. She's not there yet. But she's going to get there, and we know that. Of course, after Serena had requested that they try to have a baby, she has them do their own little ceremony. It's not exactly the same as the husband and wife ceremony. In the book, though, she stays in the kitchen while they're doing it, so they're at least alone, so they don't have to be quite so uncomfortable with the situation. But in the show, she goes up with them, and she kind of stays in the back of the room while they're doing the deed. By the end of the day, June is so freaking fed up with Fred and so fed up with everything else. She's gone back to Nick's room. She's like, no more of this fucking ceremony bullshit where we act like we have no fucking feelings and there's no emotion there. And they just straight up had hot, burning, passionate love. So good on her. I know she's married. I know a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about that. But in that kind of situation, she didn't think she was ever going to see her husband again. And honestly, at the time, she did not know that her husband was alive. Living your life in a situation like that with no intimacy, nobody to share your scares and your concerns, your joys and your anger and frustration and all of that stuff with, other than yourself, I don't blame her at all. I think one of the first real big indications that Nick is more than just a driver, that fact that he said he tried to stop them, but he couldn't stop them, that he seems to think he has some sway, that indicates there's something more going on. And she already knows at the time that there is possibly an eye, so that does make it sound like he might be the eye. Speaking of eyes, we do get bits of information. We do say that a lot of the drivers are also eyes, and the eyes have a little bit more authority. There's another episode after this point where Nick does finally admit to being an eye, but that's a little bit later. Later on, when June and Fred are doing their risky as hell Jezebel stuff, there's stuff that Nick does that gives you this indication that he's an eye. He's able to ask these questions. He's collecting things from these Marthas at Jezebel's and giving them stuff. But then again, that can also be the Marthas have this network also. So not only is there Mayday, I think the Marthas work with Mayday, but they may also work with other people. Episode 6, we have June sleeping with Nick again and saying that, oh, this is not going to happen again. Yeah, right. What a laugh riot. June does get pregnant, but not likely from that first encounter. Most likely it's from one of the many other encounters that she had with Nick afterwards. The handmaids are sent to their walking spot at the wall so that they can wash the blood off of the wall where they hang the bodies in preparation for this delegate that is coming from Mexico. And Janine makes a comment about the bodies and how I guess you get used to anything being a certain way. And June says something like this in the book as well. Mentions how her mom used to say how amazing it was that humans are so resilient that they can get used to almost anything if you just give them like the smallest incentives. And then before the delegates get there, Serena pulls June aside to tell her that she needs to be a good girl and be on her best behavior. The delegates get there, and the Mexican trade delegates ask both the handmaid and then later on the wives about whether they're happy there, about how things are there, as if they can just openly talk about this stuff in front of everybody. Just an absurd question. Of course, when she gets to the wives, they offer these canned answers that they've been groomed to give. They're living happy, fulfilling lives, fulfilling their biological destiny. They've got clean air, a 78% reduction in carbon emissions in the last 3 years, healthy food, wholesome lifestyle, as God intended it. Later, Fred is also going to be bragging about how the area that they're driving through is now all on solar. But I wonder, since there's this massive reduction in people and population and the amount of people allowed to use modern technology and all of that, how much electricity that they actually need to run that whole area. The flashbacks, I think they're on a reading tour because Serena writes these books, and Fred complains that he thinks he was being followed by the FBI. And he talks a little bit to Serena, suggests that she might write another book, which is funny because they're getting ready to implement all this Gilead stuff, which won't allow females to read or write, and he's suggesting that she just start writing another book. But they go into this event that they're supposed to be speaking in, and they're greeted with shouts from protesters and profanity, and Serena has to be rushed out with some sort of protection, and you hear shots ring out. One of Serena's assistants, I believe, ends up shot and killed, and Serena gets shot in the gut, which we're assuming is why she had such a hard time getting pregnant. And we have another flashback where Gilead is in a meeting and they're entertaining Serena's ideas, but they won't even let her enter the meeting. And then somebody comes out and they start talking to Fred, and this man goes on about how they gave too much to the women to handle and that they won't let that happen again. Which is funny because in this specific case, he's talking about an idea that was given by a woman that has given them many of their ideas, who has not been having a problem handling what was given to her. And he's trying to make some claim like, oh, they just gave them too much responsibilities. And then he goes and makes this statement that now they can just follow their biological destiny, which is a big theme throughout the show that the men like to pawn off onto all the women, that, oh, now you get to follow your biological destiny, even the ones that are not able to have kids. She came up with a lot of these ideas, but her ideas were about females staying in the home, taking care of the family, not about them not being allowed to read, not about them not being allowed to work at all, because of the things that Gilead does and the things that Fred does. They basically take any livelihood that Serena really had, anything that she enjoyed and was passionate about, and they took it away from her. And you will hear her later talk about that. She will literally ask Fred right to his face why he took that from her. And then, of course, as I said, I think Serena, she wanted this family focus. She wanted the woman to be able to stay home, take care of the family, that kind of stuff. But did Serena really intend all this lack of autonomy? Or did she just intend that family life aspect? I still wouldn't agree with her ideas, at least not completely, but I can get on board a lot more with the idea that women should be able to stay home and focus on the family and all of that, so long as you're not telling women that they cannot make their own choices, that they cannot do all the other things that men can do, that they cannot read and cannot write, and that they cannot have their own jobs and professions, not even inside the home. When you start telling them that they can't have any autonomy over their body or their life, that is going way too far. And I think in this case, this is one of those be careful what you wish for episodes for Serena. You just might get it. Lots of other things, I think, when it comes to Fred and Serena. He has an argument with him later where she confronts him about his infidelity. He throws it back in her face, basically tries to claim that the fault lies with her. So she turns around and yells at him about how he's too fucking weak to father a child, and that June is pregnant, but it is sure not his, that God would not pass his weakness off onto a child. There's other situations where Serena, I mean, you've seen so many of the times where Serena makes threats to June. Serena is conniving and manipulative. Serena and Fred both dangle Hannah in front of June, but then rip her away right afterwards. There's so many situations like that. You have a situation where June actually goes and asks Fred to protect Hannah from Serena, and he's like, oh, she would never hurt a child. And June just straight up looks at him and says, you don't know her. We have everyone getting ready for this big delegate dinner to show off Gilead's accomplishments. And the stars of the show, the handmaids and their children. Serena, being her thoughtful self, makes Aunt Lydia remove all the noticeably injured handmaids. Seriously, folks, it is Gilead's fault that these girls are damaged, and they get punished for it. Then after the show of these decorous, regimented handmaids, Serena makes a speech about their healthy, wholesome way of life, and then has this really fucked up parade of the children of the handmaids that they gave birth to. Their children that they can't hold, presented like some prize for these countries that lack children. It's so fucked up. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the brainwashing and grooming that occurs in Gilead. This entire regime operates using brainwashing and grooming and surveillance, spying on each other, using this fear and inability to trust people in order to keep everyone in line. Starting from inception and each introduction into any given role, Gilead uses shame, guilt, blame, fear, distrust, and some small incentives, or large, if you're in a high enough position. They use these things to mold their totalitarian surveillance state. The prescribed, very scripted, structured procedures and ceremony, blended with claims of biblical authority, are also used to maintain this setup. Religion can be used to demoralize or praise certain human behaviors, which Gilead uses to great effect in matters of intimacy, lust, gender, procreation, leadership, dress, subservience, reading, gaining knowledge, all of it. There are also many individualistic examples of this kind of brainwashing and grooming that occur throughout the show. A major example of this is the Scrabble sessions that Fred uses to groom June, so that she will be more used to breaking rules with Fred that come into use later on. There's a point later on when June asks why Fred brought her to the place that he brought her, and he claims that he thought she'd like it, which is bullshit. He liked it. That's why he brought her there. It had nothing to do with what she wanted or what she liked. It had to do with her being an object and him wanting her to do that. And even when she brings it up to Moira, Moira explains that, yeah, some of the commanders do this stuff. It's a kind of power trip. You got that right. It's a fucking power trip. You have other examples like Serena coercing Nick and June into engaging in sex in order to get a child for herself outside of Gilead ceremonies, which is against everybody's law. So she will eventually pay for that. But at the time, she thinks she's going to get away with it. After June does get pregnant, you have Serena threatening her that as long as her baby's safe, then so will June's baby be safe. Like, these things are very predatory, and they are very individualistic ways of them manipulating the situation, grooming them and brainwashing them and forcing them to do what these people want. I think even some of the stuff with Nick could even veer into this realm in somewhat of a coercive fashion. In the first place, it's a dangerous game that they're playing, having sex over and over again. But not only that, at least when they're having sex, it's usually in an isolated space in his room where other people aren't really seeing. But there are multiple times that Nick gets up really close to June in public spaces, kisses her in the hallway, to which she says, it only makes it worse. They do have these trysts in his room, which also build up a certain amount of comfort and trust with him that she would not necessarily have had. Even before they became intimate, he did things like get up really close to her, up in her face, intentionally touch his feet to hers during ceremony days, engaging in conversation with her even, which for Gilead was at the very least discouraged. But according to the book, June expressed that this wasn't even allowed, that they really weren't even supposed to talk to each other. I don't think Nick ever intended this to be coercive or to put her in danger, but that's the reality, is that it could be coercive. It could put her in danger. It does build a certain amount of trust that she might not necessarily have had that can put her in dangerous situations. By the end of the episode, June finally does go back to the delegate and explains the horrific treatment that they receive, the reality of their far from happy, unchosen positions. But the delegate can't do anything about it, won't do anything about it. As she walks away, June gets this amazing news, though, from the assistant of the delegate. Luke is alive. And that assistant can get a message to him. And we find out later that that message takes about 3 weeks for it to get back to Luke. Episode 7 is devoted a lot towards Luke and his escape. Last time that June had really seen him, he had been shot. She wasn't sure what had happened to him, but thought he probably had died. And so this episode revolves around his escape after that. We see after Luke has crashed the car and he gets out and makes sure that June and Hannah are okay, tells them to go to the woods across the street, run about 2 miles to the north, that there should be somebody waiting for them. He's shot in the side, and He's taken away in an ambulance, but the ambulance crashes, killing everyone in it but Luke. Is still injured, but he takes a guardian's coat and a med bag. Eventually, he manages to get back to where the car was, where he left June and Hannah. But they're gone. Their bag, Hannah's bunny, her shoe, they're what remains. And Luke finds them. He's got to get himself to safety because he's been shot and he's injured. So he makes his way to this cafe. They go back a little further in time, closer to the beginning of their escape attempt. You see Luke trying to calm June down as they're riding in the trunk, which is an interesting contrast from the much later season 5, when June has to try to calm Luke down from his freak out after being captured by Foe Gilead. They get stopped by the guards, and one of the guards looks in the trunk but pretty much ignores them and lets them go. And the guy that is helping by driving them says that this guy owes him one for taking his sister to the prom. In fact, that same guy said that he's helping them because June's mom had given him the snip back when they started prohibiting such things. There are some people that find Luke and they help him out once they verify that he is not, in fact, a guardian, since he is wearing a guardian's jacket. He's shot, he's not doing great, but they have a van or bus or something and the ability to help him. We also get a little bit of information from this group. They've tried helping others, tried to get people out. Some of them being held in a school described much like the Red Center. And they managed to only get one person out. All the others were killed. That person is with them. Her name is Zoe. Zoe has one of the cattle tags. But because they have given this information about how they got Zoe, that actually does give Luke a little bit of information about these red centers and how these handmaids are captured and trained. Of course, Luke keeps insisting that he needs to go back for Hannah and June, and he's too freaking injured. He really needs to heal up, but he's not really seeing reason. He just wants to get back there and go and get June and Hannah. And this guy explains that, well, we're going to the coast. Maybe you could possibly get a scoot boat back to Marblehead. We also hear a couple other place names in this discussion. We hear Campbell Pond Road, Jackman, the Brunswick area. Once they get to one of their stops, one of the women has Luke come with her, and she shows him into this church where all the people who had come from Brunswick tried to hold up there and fight, and they were all hung. She presses to him that this is going to happen to him if he tries to go back. She tells him, you should try to escape to Canada where they have more resources, and then you can try to look for her from there. Unfortunately, when this group does try to escape to the border in a boat, they're attacked. Most of them die, all but Luke and Zoe and whoever's driving the boat. At least they get away. And the next time we see the both of them, Luke and Zoe are in a place in Canada that they're calling Little America. And Luke is called in at that point to get this message that June sent from the delegate's assistant. Now, I'll talk a little bit about other escapes. We see other places in the show and the books where attempts and sometimes successes are made at trying to escape Gilead. Back in the first episode, June sometimes had flashbacks of their first attempted escape. And in the Testaments, Hannah sometimes has these little flashes of running through the woods being chased. But it's interspersed by a story that her Gilead mom tells her of how she was chosen by her. We hear about a Martha that escaped, and how some will do interviews after they escape over the border to Canada and sometimes to England. And of course, we see Moira's great escape. The first time trying to escape from the Red Center, and then the second time at the end of the season, escaping from Gilead and getting into Canada. But not to forget, we also see other attempts of escape through death. You have Janine and of Glenn, one who directly tried to die, and another who indirectly, knowing that running down guardians like she did would likely get her killed. We also hear of a woman drinking drain cleaner, and previously the handmaid who hung herself. We hear about bar mirrors being taken out and things like this to prevent escape through death. In episode 8, this episode begins with June in Nick's room again, and I noticed something that did bother me a bit. It was broad daylight. Like, these trysts are dangerous enough at night. In the daylight, even more so. We get more flashbacks, this time of Nick looking for work with none to be had. And after he gets into a fight with a guy at the place that he's trying to find work, the guy in charge takes Nick to lunch, has a talk with him, and Nick explains about his work situation and his family challenges, and the guy uses this to draw him into the Sons of Jacob, this extremist sect that's behind the whole Gilead regime and buildup. He offers him work and a place in their sect. And so Nick becomes a driver, almost like a fly on the wall, hearing discussions early in the planning of Gilead. Then we go back to more current times, and June goes to her room to find that Fred is waiting there. Another thing that he is not supposed to be doing. He is not supposed to be in her room. And this is not the only time that he went in her room. There were other episodes where he just popped up in her room and started exploring in there. There was one time that he was waiting for her in the hallway, kind of glanced at her, and then freaking dropped his head and walked on by. He does a lot of this stuff. And some of it is really freaking quite creepy, in my opinion. Fred preps her for this trip that they're going to take. He starts shaving her legs, gets this skimpy outfit for her to put on, puts makeup on her, dolls her hair up, gets one of Serena's cloaks for her to wear, along with a pass that is going to get June into certain places that only the wives and husbands are allowed to go to. And Nick, as a driver, gets to witness this whole indiscretion. And apparently this was not the first time. Through the first checkpoints, they can go through just with the pass that June has, but after they pass this bridge, and no females are supposed to go past there, so she has to duck down so that the guards do not see her when they go through any of the checkpoints. Sneaks her in through a back entrance. But all of this stuff that's happened, and all of this stuff that's happening with Nick's interactions, begs the question, how does he feel about all of this? Jealous? Concerned? Frustrated? Conflicted? Probably a mix of these. We see him asking around and seems to be giving some hints that he's starting to grow feelings for his handmaid. This place used to be a hotel, the same as one of the hotels that she used to go to with Luke back before he got his divorce. Now it's called Jezebel's by many of the people who know about it. There are various women, and they are servicing and providing companionship to the higher up commanders, other delegates, stuff like that, who are male. And June asks about the people that are there, and Fred just assumes she is referring to the men. when she actually meant the women. When she explains that, he says that those were people who couldn't assimilate. One's a sociology professor, there's a lawyer, etc. And then later on, June sees Moira. A lot of this happens the same as it is in the book. There's just some minor differences. And Moira kind of signals to June once she realizes that that's June there to meet her in the bathroom. And so June gets instructions to get to the bathroom, meets Moira there, talks for a short amount of time, but Moira has her come back later after that dumbass goes to sleep so that they can talk for a little bit longer. In the room, Fred does his thing, and once he falls asleep, she's able to sneak out and meet Moira at her sleeping quarters, where they have this open area where all the other ladies there go to sleep once they're done with the events of the night. Moira tells her about her escape and eventual recapture almost a year later, and their choice. You go to the colonies or you go here. But after they get back the next day, Nick tells June that they have to stop. She confronts him, that she knows nothing about him, asks if this life is good enough for him, and he responds that they're being stupid, that it's dangerous. Yeah, it is. It was all along. You just now figuring this out? I don't think so. You're just now willing to say, let's put a stop to it because you give a shit about her and you're worried that you're going to both end up dead. And he says that they'll both end up on the wall. But she says at least someone will remember her when she's gone. And that's something. Better than being forgotten and erased, which Gilead works so hard to do. He finally says his name, that he's from Michigan. And of course, we see all those other examples of connection between June and Nick and their growing relationship. I mean, little things like when June was showing Nick some leg, June entertaining whether Nick was thinking about her, and if he knew about their Scrabble sessions, Nick looking up at her while she's getting ready to dress or undress, and her lowering the blinds so he can't see her anymore. Her joking that she wore this red dress just for him, and him saying that she shouldn't wear anything for him. The little subtle touching her hand, kissing her in the hallway, getting up close to her, expressing concern for her in situations where she gets really upset. Like when she goes to him about the delegate. She told the delegate that she was happy, that she straight up lied, and he insists that it's too dangerous, that there was nothing that she could really do about. Another time when she freaks out after being propositioned by that creepy doctor, and he finds out she's pregnant, he bends down next to her, feeling her belly, laying his head against her shoulder, and when she expresses that it's terrible that she's pregnant, he says, no, it's not. And then there's the 2 times that the eyes come for her, which we've talked a little bit about before. First time he tries to warn her not to hide anything, that everybody breaks. The second time he actually tells her to trust the eyes, that they are Mayday, and that she has to trust him, which happens at the very end of the season. Then we get a flashback of Rita finding the previous handmaid hanging in her room, Nick cutting her down, and Serena explaining to Fred as she's taken away, what did you think was going to happen? So apparently these indiscretions are nothing new for Fred. He's been doing this for a while. After Fred takes June, he feeds her a line about bringing her there because she might like it. He's just using her like any other possession or object that he owns to play these dangerous games with. He says that they could jump the gun on the ceremony, which she can't really say no to. There's other signs that we see of Fred's infidelities. Even early on when Serena greets June with, don't get any ideas, he's my husband till death do us part. When Rita freaks out at June, crashed out on the floor, because she's been primed from the previous handmaid that killed herself. Probably because of this shit that Fred was doing with her. Plus, one of the times when Serena is trying to talk to Naomi about her cheating husband, and she shouts back to Serena that she knows about her previous handmaid and what her husband did with her, and that men don't change. Going along with the previous indiscretions from Fred that led to his handmaid's suicide, we see a flashback of Nick reporting to Commander Price, I believe, the guy that brought him into the Sons of Jacob. These reports and the eyes are another way that Gilead attempts to kind of keep the people at the top in line. Episode 9 begins with a ceremony where Janine is supposed to be handing over her baby to the wife, Naomi. And then she has to leave the household. June's been concerned about Janine for a bit. She has explained to Serena. She's seen Janine falling more and more out of touch and asks Aunt Lydia if she seems all right. It's interesting that these two started with June really not liking Janine. But now it's not like that. And Lydia does notice this closeness, and so does Serena, which they will come back later because of that. So even though Aunt Lydia thinks that Janine is strong enough, it's too freaking soon. And she goes through this ceremony and she freaks out. It's the aunts that are supposed to be making sure that they have proper placement. Now, I don't know that the aunts necessarily care if the handmaids are emotionally ready, but they're in charge. They're the ones making these choices. During the ceremony, while the handmaids are all lined up, June tries to talk to another handmaid, Alma. Alma acts like she has no idea what the heck June is talking about until later when they're a little bit away from the group. And Alma explains that there were just too many people around. June gets an assignment from Mayday to go back to Jezebel's, retrieve an important package, and then Alma says that tonight might be good. I'm like, holy shit, you want her to go back into that place that day? How the hell is she gonna accomplish this? But she does. While June's gone, Serena goes to the kitchen looking for something to drink. And Rita might have slipped a little bit and tipped off Serena to Fred's outing. Don't know for sure. Rita helps Serena find what she's looking for, but then asks, are you sure you don't want something stronger? So they both have some alcohol together and have a little discussion where Serena actually learns something that she didn't know. Probably because she doesn't really care about her servants outside of their service to her. Rita had a son who was 19 when he died in the war. I'm assuming the war is the Gilead War that was used to take over the U.S. But she never said one way or another what side he was on. And it was never asked. At Jezebel's, things do not go as planned. Fred didn't let her go out of the room at all, kept her in the room, and thinks that June wanted some kind of menage a trois with Moira. So he brings Moira to the room. And Moira is not happy that June is back in this place, asks her if she's crazy. Why the fuck would you come back here? They have this huge fight. Moira seems completely defeated. She's lost her spunk and all her fight. And June tries to remind her of her promises that she made back when this whole thing started. Promises to fight, her promises that they would go back and get Hannah. I mean, until this point, both in the book and on the show, June has been using this memory of Moira's fight to talk herself through some of her toughest moments. So seeing Moira like this was really hard. Tears were shed, and June left with no package, seemingly a lost friend. But then we find out later that Moira came through after all. when a package is delivered at the grocery store for her, signed by Moira. June gets back and she goes to sleep. She's woken up by Serena because, like I said, Serena and Aunt Lydia have been noticing this closeness between June and Janine, and June needs to go and intervene with something terrible that's going on with Janine. June has to talk Janine down, and after convincing Janine to give her the baby, threatening to jump from the bridge, June at least convinces her to save the baby, but Janine chooses to seek freedom for herself, and she jumps from the bridge, not before telling everyone there all of the unlawful mess that Commander Warren was engaging in with Janine. That man is in trouble, just not enough if you ask me. This episode, stuff is about ready to hit the fan because June is being confronted by Serena, who has the little frock that June was wearing at Jezebel's. It might be in the book, or maybe she told something to Fred about finding lipstick on her cloak. And I also suspect that whatever Rita had said kind of clued her in to make her a little bit more suspicious. And she had confronted Fred when he came in the door late from Jezebel's. Still, stuff's not looking good. Serena, we know how she gets. When she gets freaking angry, it is not a pretty sight. And honestly, I thought it was going to go a lot worse than it did. But she still freaking hits June. She ends up freaking drawing blood. She's bleeding from her forehead. And she forces June to take a pregnancy test. Because, good Lord, at least, if nothing else, I might get something good out of this. And June turns out to actually be pregnant. And Serena goes on about how she's prayed for this and that, like, June is her miracle. And June's like, do you honestly think that I would pray to bring a child into this house? So, obviously, this is not June's prayer. Since June has been confirmed to be pregnant, Rita and Serena go back to their weird pseudo-nice treatment. This is where Nick actually finds out that, yes, June is pregnant. He kneels down. He feels her belly. He lays his head on her shoulder. She says that it's a terrible thing, and he explains that it's not terrible. But in the process, Serena catches what's going on, and that is going to come back to bite them later on. And then we also have that drive where she takes her over to where Hannah is living, dangling Hannah in front of her, doesn't allow June to get out of the vehicle, doesn't allow her to see or talk to her kid, and then rips her away. But of course, as a threat, where she says that if her baby's all right, then June's baby will be all right. And this is the scenario where after the shit that fucking Serena pulled, June knows that she cannot trust Serena to leave her daughter alone. She knows that Serena knows exactly where her kid is, and that Serena is far from being beyond hurting her. First, I think she tries to go to Nick, but Nick is not there. Probably because what he is preparing for later. But we don't know that. We just know that June is desperate. She tries to go to Nick. Nick isn't there. So she goes to the next person that she thinks might be able to do something, and that's Fred. Tells him that he needs to protect her daughter from Serena. And he's like, well, Serena would never hurt a child. And she just straight up tells him, you don't know her. Next, we get to experience Warren's trial, which is very, very different from the Handmaid and Martha trial that we saw earlier. Later in the series, we'll also see a trial of Serena trying to get access back into Gilead, which also looks much closer to Warren's trial. I think it's Commander Price who actually presses about Warren's sin and that his wife actually requested he get the highest punishment that She is in fear of his soul. She loves him so much. So here's the results. He actually gets some kind of sentencing. I think it should have been a lot more, but at least it's something. Then later we see June finally opening up the package that she got from the grocery store from Moira's Great Escape, and June starts reading them. These are all the handmaid's letters. And then we have Moira actually being shown as making it all the way to Canada, and she gets there, and it's really kind of a shell shock. She gets to Canada after all the horrific traumatic shit that she experienced in Gilead, and she's offered a caseworker, a phone card, a medical card, medical care, scripts for medicine, clothing, cash, food, a shower, a place to stay, and help. I mean, these transitions from this completely traumatic, awful experience in Gilead to some place that has some resemblance of normalcy are actually very, very difficult transitions. I think even for Luke and for the girl Zoe that is with him when he escapes to Canada, it's tough. Like, we barely ever hear a word out of Zoe, even 3 years later when they're showing them both in Little America at Canada. Zoe's barely speaking. I don't think we hear a word from Zoe until probably the second season. And of course, we're going to see other trauma and issues with those transitions and assimilation to Canada's lifestyle in future seasons. I think one of the best parts on this show, when they asked Moira initially if she has any family, she says no, because like real blood related family, legal family, she doesn't have. And when she gets done with the initial processing and collecting all these things that they're giving her and getting all this information for the help that's available for her, she goes out into the hallway and is greeted by Luke. And they're reunited. She's almost surprised that he had put her on the list as a family member. The whole scene, it was just so emotional and so amazing that this person who is dealing with this whole traumatic transition and probably feels quite alone and really in shock of the whole situation sees somebody that she knows who cares about her enough that he actually considers her family. Even with all the stuff that she used to give to Luke back when they were friends, because Moira was not always friendly to Luke, but he still cared enough about her to consider her family. I'm going to talk a little bit about Aunt Lydia. I think she deserves a little bit of focus. She seems to be one of the really only true believers in most of this mess. We see that with the way that she reacts to June during the whole of Glenn eye discussion situation. She rules with a very heavy hand and harsh punishment. Yet she seems to somehow care for these handmaids and other women in general in her own strange way. She has these ideas about forming some sort of family or sisterly camaraderie, and she uses that in things like the birthing ceremonies, the handing over the babies to the wives ceremony, and even some of the persecution, all of which I think she uses as some sort of coping tool for these girls who she knows are going through awful crap that is unbearable for many people. It's kind of a we're all in this horrible hellscape together kind of thing. She had some kind of closeness to Janine for a while. Now, we're presented information in the book that we don't necessarily get from the show on this. On one hand, maybe Aunt Lydia feels very guilty at Janine having her eye removed, especially now that she's really starting to crack under the pressure. But also in the book, Lydia uses Janine as sort of a teacher's pet when she finds out that Janine knows nothing about Moira's escape from the Red Center, but has a natural desire to be accepted and for attention. So Aunt Lydia uses this, has Janine keep an eye out for any clues or hints about Moira's situation. Now, she never finds out anything, but this puts Janine in a position above the other handmaids. And we'll see more of this kind of behavior used later on in the series, where Aunt Lydia uses Janine to kind of keep tabs on the girls, or to try to help out with the girls with things that Aunt Lydia maybe doesn't understand very well. I think Aunt Lydia also probably feels a bit guilty for not taking Janine's mental health more seriously upon her transfer to a strange person's house. And then, of course, we have the bridge incident. She's got to be feeling conflicted. She knows that refusal will be punished and that all the handmaids refuse to stone Janine to death. This may be of some relief to Aunt Lydia, but she can't show it. Those guards could kill them and her. She also doesn't like being disobeyed. Lydia has a very sadistic streak. She doesn't want Janine killed, but she can't appear weak in front of the guards, in front of the other aunts, or in front of the handmaids. She wants them to fear her and to take her seriously. She wants to stay at the top of the pack, so to speak. Still, Janine's persecution is a failure, and she's going to punish everyone for it. And this is going to bring us towards the end of the episode and the season. June's going to be escorted away, and Nick tells her to just go with them, to trust them. They're with Mayday. June's going to be carted away in the back of one of these vans, not knowing exactly what's going to happen to her. Rita is going to go back to her room and find those letters, and she's going to hold those letters for June until June returns. Now, I don't know if Rita ever thought that June was coming back, but the fact that she just held on to him instead of getting rid of them, especially the Marthas do have this network, and Rita does seem to be involved with part of that network. She didn't do anything to get rid of them or to pass them on, but either way, it ends up working out in the end, but we don't see that until the next season.
I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I kind of missed it in my conglomeration of recordings. I had actually talked about this. Somehow I missed it. So I'm just going to talk about it now. I found this image and I thought it was pretty priceless of after Serena finds out that June is pregnant and she does this little prayer over her belly and contrasting it with Serena later on when she's pregnant in Faux Gilead with her Faux Gilead family that's basically abducted her, and that Faux Gilead wife praying over her belly. I thought it was just quite the priceless image.
Next one is going to be season 1 of Supernatural.
I hope to see you next time for my next Blast from the Past episode. Like I said, it'll be Supernatural, so if you'd like to see that, you're welcome to. It will probably be a while, but hopefully it won't be as long as this one took. See you next time. Bye.